Coming up, we discuss the New Jersey Devils. Game number 3. The Florida Panthers are certainly a better team than the Devils saw in the first 2 matchups of the season, and yet the effort, energy, and the initial drive from the start of this game was simply not there for the Devils. We break down what was nearly an erased comeback play, but it came up short in the end. Yes, sir. It is DPL, the Devils Puck Luck Podcast, where we are your host. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Danny McDonough. And you, good sir, we're at The Rock for game number 3 on the young season for the New Jersey Devils. Where, listen, we're going to get into everything top to bottom, talk about some quotes from Lindy Ruff. We can start at the back end, though, where the Devils tried to make this an entertaining game for the people that were there at the arena.
Yeah, we played 20 minutes. We played a whole 20 minutes tonight. So,
if I got to give you more than 20, what are we really doing out here?
I mean, the third period, you just can see how dynamic this team is and how the young core is going to tire a little bit older veteran teams. You know, Florida has a little bit of older guys in there, so it looked like they were a little bit tired toward the end of the game, and the Devils took advantage of it.
Are they, though? The Devils might look fresh because they didn't do much for the first 40. So it's kind of hard to tell.
They're just relaxing. Like, we don't have to play the first 40. But no, listen, the last 20 minutes were great. You know, you got obviously see the power play. You got to see the 6-on-4 scoring a goal. You got a beautiful goal by Jesper Bratt. Holler with a great deflection goal, too. So, I mean, you saw phenomenal things, you know, and the Rock was loud. You know, I give the fans a lot of credit. You know, they stayed the entire game, and it was loud, and it's meaningful on a Monday night to get a crowd like that, and for them to stick around when it's 4-0, you know, into the third period is a great sign.
And certainly, McLeod also had a nice little, just kind of the easiest goal, as Amanda Stein put it, the easiest goal he's ever going to get in his career, just waiting kind of on the doorstep there to put that one in. The Devils fall 4-3 in this one. You mentioned things are going there in the third period. If we want to point out to one penalty or one non-call in this game, obviously, as the momentum is going the Devils' direction, it's a very clear tripping penalty that just, were you surprised there in real time that it went unnoticed by the refs? Because this one's going up the left boards. The entire play is there. There's not a lot else happening except for 2 players. And it just seemed, from my naked eye watching from home, a blatant trip on that play. Nothing gets called.
I mean, you expect the refs to let certain like kind of borderline calls go, but when an egregious penalty happens like that, which it was an egregious trip. I don't know if he thought like he tripped over his puck, the stick, whatever it might have been, his own stick, but that was a clear tripping penalty. And I mean, everybody saw it in real time, you know, in the arena. I'm sure on television, everybody saw it too, you know, watching the broadcast. So it's tough. The reason why it's tough is because the first 3 games, the refs have been calling tight games, right? You know, if they're calling tight games, they're going to call penalties that are borderline calls, slashing calls that are borderline, hooking calls that are borderline. That's an obvious trip. It's got to get called, you know, but you and I talk about it all the time. It's as a fan, you're like, this is crazy. The reason why they lost the game is that it's not. The Devils didn't play for 40 minutes. They played for 20 minutes. You can't put that all on why they lost the game. Maybe they tie it. Maybe they don't tie it. Fact is, it was a penalty. It was missed. It's going to happen. It's probably going to happen again throughout the season. So we have to put it behind us.
Yeah, I think if you talk about that being a back and forth game and it's 4-3 in the third period and that play goes uncalled, then you say, hey, listen, this has been a tight game throughout. There is something about sometimes the way that you perform does influence the way your team is perceived, the way the game flow is perceived. So nevertheless, there's plenty of reasons why the Devils lost this game, and it doesn't come down to just that one moment. Before we get into Lindy Ruff's post-game comments and some big decisions here that he had throughout the course of this game, it was another slow start. Like, I'm a little bit surprised with how this team played during camp and in preseason, putting so much pressure on the opposition, really coming out flying and seemingly playing loose hockey. What seems to have happened over these first 3 games is there's an over desire or too much focus on, I'm going to make this perfect extra pass here, or maybe I don't want to make the mistake here if I have a defensive responsibility, etc. But they just seem to come out, I want to say tentative, but it also just seems kind of lackadaisical. Like the first 40 minutes of this game was just, okay, I guess we're here. And this is the third home game to start the season. You would have thought that they would have had a little bit of a ramp up here and not need Lindy Ruff to really lace into them before you get inspired, which is exactly that happened in game number 2 this season.
Yeah, they're out muscled, right? They're outworked.
Yeah.
That's what's weird about it. It's just they're out hustled completely. And to watch it live and to see the pace of hockey by both teams, you're right. It's like you look at how they were in the preseason. Obviously, it's preseason, and you're just like, what is going on right now? This isn't the team that we saw coming out the gate that we thought was going to be absolutely on fire offensively. Granted, we're scoring a lot of goals. We are producing offensively. But for me, it's more of the puck containment. It's more of the outlet passes from the defensive zone to the neutral zone to our
Sure.
offensive zone. We're trying to be too pretty. Like they're making every single extra pass that doesn't need to be made. Blind board passes, to the neutral zone that are just getting picked off at the blue line by the opposition. It was so sloppy. We can go over literally every player, what bad plays they had, right? Talk
Right.
about some, but everybody played like crap. I think if I'm going to point out one guy that I thought played really solid defensively the entire game, Kevin Ball. I thought Kevin Ball played a very good defensive game and he was very reliable with the puck, but I don't know. It's just weird. My question is, because they're projected to be such a great team, right? To be a top 5 NHL team, is it really a mentality? It's like, hey, listen, we're better than these guys. Like, do they feel that? Like, are they not going out and playing hockey? Like, it's confusing to me. I'm very confused why they're getting off to such slow starts every game. And I think you saw it, and I saw it in the Lindy Ruff post game. It's like, listen, we got to be better. Like, we're just not good enough right now, and we're not going to win games if we continue to do what we're doing.
Yeah, and I mentioned this in the post game coming off of the second game of the season, the overtime shootout loss, where you got to remember coming into this year, the Devils have been marked as a top 5 championship odds team, and they are a young team as well. So I do feel like the Florida Panthers, you went on a phenomenal run last year through the playoffs. So you come in, you're on the road, and you go, yeah, let's make a statement against one of the teams that is being labeled as one of the best, right? So you want to make that case that hey, they may be getting talked about a lot, but remember, we went on the better playoff run, right? Or as we've seen early in the season, hey, you may think we're not a playoff team, but we're pushing for that this year. And here's a team that we can make an example against. Again, most of it feels self-inflicted. It feels like it's coming from the devil's side, not from outside forces, but we'll see how it unfolds here. And at the back end of this episode, we are just going to touch on 3 games down. Where do we really stand in terms of a level of concern? Before we get into Lindy Ruff's comments, though, let's remind you that today's episode is going to be brought to you by DraftKings Sportsbook. You know that the NFL season is going strong right now, and DraftKings Sportsbook is hooking up new customers with an offer that's even stronger. Bet $5 on any game over the course of the week, and you can get $200 instantly in bonus bets. And DraftKings isn't stopping there. All customers can take advantage of a sweetener offer every game day throughout this October. I did not put anything down on the Dallas Chargers game because that was Dallas laying 1.5 going to the West Coast. But you know what I did do? I took the points in the New York Football Giants, and they covered like champions. They don't win in the record books, but they certainly win me a couple of bucks. So you get over there and get in on the game day greatness by downloading the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code
THPN.
New customers can score $200 instantly in bonus bets when they bet just $5 on the NFL. That's promo code
THPN.
only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Visit www.100gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please pay responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hills Casino and Resort, licensed partner of Golden Nugget Lake Charles, 21 plus age varies by jurisdiction, void in our friends to the north, Ontario, Canada. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gambling resources. Okay, so let's turn our attention then to the post game. Listen, we can talk about some of the sloppy play. We are going to focus in on a couple of players here and decisions, though, by Lindy Ruff. First, in the post game, I'm just going to rapid fire a couple of these. I'll take a closer look, said Lindy Ruff, but I don't think we can lay a lot of the blame on him. Speaking about the tech between the pipes, we'll get into that in a second. To a man, we should all be. Players, coaches, everyone should be angry, talking about if he is frustrated or angry about tonight's performance. And we need more out of a lot of guys. This isn't about one guy. We need more out of our group.
Oh,
Last note, coach's decision on anyone who did not play in the third period. And as we know, there were several key players who did not. Just where are you at on Lindy Ruff? 3 games in, but clearly he's not satisfied with what he's seen on the ice.
love it. Accountability. Accountability. Timo was the worst on the ice offensively tonight, and it was blatantly obvious with those bad penalties he took. And what's crazy is he had his only scoring chance I've seen in the first 3 games, really, right before he took his second penalty, and it was just such a bad penalty right in front of the ref, a tripping call. He was slow on the puck. You didn't even know he was out there half the time. I love it. I love that Lindy's holding these guys accountable no matter their contract, no matter how long they just signed to the Devils organization, 8 years and 8.9, whatever it might have been, for I think that's what it was for Timo. He doesn't care. It's just play the game. You're going to be held accountable. Doesn't matter how much money you're making from Curtis Lazar, who had a poor night too. You saw it, really from the jump with him. He was very slow on the puck. He was a lot better in the first 2 games. The last game,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, it was against the Yotes. He was better. So it's concerning to me that not only do we have issues with Timo right now, but we don't have the secondary scoring as much as we'd want. Granted, we saw it in the third period tonight, but we don't have the other guys stepping up in big ways. Nico's doing fine defensively. I think you can agree. We've talked about it. He's getting better in the faceoffs. We saw him getting better in the faceoffs as after the first game. My biggest concern is just the fluidity of these lines, man. And it goes back to your point. You talked about it all preseason, and you could very well be right. Maybe it was silly to move Holtz off of that second line and just keep that consistency that they had in the preseason and roll with the lines that they had and see where it went. Now you're going to see the juggling of lines like you saw Lindy do for the second and third period, which we always expect with Lindy. Defensive pairing stayed the same, minus Marino coming out, basically only having that one shift in the third period, which, to be honest, I didn't see it live as much for that to be merited as much as Timo and Lazar, but the coaching staff obviously saw something that they did not like at all and pulled Marino out of the game. But all around, it was just a bad performance, and if I'm going to single one guy out, it is Timo. I think Timo needs to step up in a massive way. Yes, it's only 3 games, but he really needs to step up.
Yeah, I think you look at, and the reason, if you're going to look at these guys as to why they were being benched, Lazar is an interesting one to me because, again, he brought over last season, getting his feet wet. I'm okay with that. You're having a little bit of a sluggish game, right? You're not quite playing as well as we've seen you play early in the season. Fine. The Timo one, that's a clear message being sent to me from Lindy Ruff to Timo Meier. You are one of the top players on this team. There's no room for this, right? Lazar is, hey, you're one of the bottom line guys. You're having an off night. That's all right. You'll be right back in the rotation. For Timo, there is no rate. There is no, we go to somebody else for what you do for this team. You need
Yeah,
to be a physical presence. You need to be a scoring presence. And you said it, and even going back to the games prior here, there wasn't that production on that second line. And while I maybe was coming from it, to be 100% honest, right? I was coming from I'm rooting for Alexander Holtz. I want to see him play well. But when you go high level, if you didn't believe in him as a coaching staff enough to go into the regular season with him on the second line, then you shouldn't have started him there in the camp because you just don't see any continuity there. And while I'm not overreacting to the first 3 games, and I actually want to ask you a question about that as well, as the gauge of this and
mhm.
when you start to be, raising an eyebrow around concerns. But I don't love the messing with the lines in the third game. Now understanding they end up scoring 3 goals, they make it very exciting, right? And you go, well, you're making tweaks. That's how you spark the team in a game when you're down. I get that. But a part of me wants to look at it and say, these are the lines right now. You guys need to figure this out. Specifically, when you look at a Marino, if Ruff saw an issue there with Timo, if he thought he saw an issue there, it's like, what is the expectation? Are these guys going to develop chemistry by not playing with one another, or are they going to develop it out there on the ice? And in the end, you lose this game. Does it matter that you lost 4-3 and you showed something? Maybe. But
Yeah,
30 games from now, I'm not going to care about the loss. You know what I
right.
mean? The loss was the loss. I want to know these guys are getting where they need to be together.
I like that they scored 3 goals. Obviously, and they had a chance to tie that
Yeah.
game up late. Obviously, it goes into what they can build on this week in practicing going into playing the Islanders on Friday. I disagree here. I disagree because I think Timo is a top 6 guy, like we're talking about. And if he sucks the way he's been sucking, you got to get him out of what he's doing in that position. And you're
I'm
gonna
fine with
have.
him. I'm fine with. So maybe I'm splitting hairs here, I guess, right?
I
In a lot
understand.
of
I
ways.
understand what you mean. You want some consistency of certain guys playing with certain guys and sticking to that. I
Yeah.
totally get that. On the other hand, I'm okay with the way he switched things up because I think you needed to see new looks and who is going to gel well together.
Mhm.
And it put a fire under all their asses, man. I think that whatever was said in that second intermission, I feel like you have to think that Lindy Ruff was like, guys, get it together. You're playing like crap. You know you're playing like crap. This is not the team we are. What are you doing? There's going to be some major changes, and you're going to see the major changes. And I wouldn't be surprised if Lindy Ruff went in there and was just like, all right, Lazar, you're not playing. Timo, you're going to get a shift, and that's it. So he might have went in there a little more aggressive. We don't know how he went into the locker room, but I'm assuming he did
Probably
that.
subdued.
I'm assuming he did that, and he's just like, "There's gonna be changes. We're gonna try some things."
I actually had here in the locker room. This is what happened in between that second and third period. Lindy Ruff communicating with the entire team, but we can go ahead and isolate Timo Meier. I believe this is the message that he sent over to him.
Mop the ice.
I'm not here to learn how to mop. I'm here to learn how to play hockey.
Mop it.
And so Timo Meier was seen mopping it for most of the third period from the bench. I don't know the specifics, but there's a good chance that that was the case. I agree with you. I think that the hard part for me probably is the idea of, well, Lindy Ruff, you're the coach. And he said this too. He said it's on the coaches, it's on the staff as well. Everybody is culpable in the lack of focus coming out here to start these games. But now every single game, you've basically done the same thing. So my question to Lindy Ruff would be, well, why don't you just say whatever you say after the second period? Say it before the first period. And I know I'm being, tongue in cheek about it.
Of course,
But
of course.
but instilling some type of drive to this thing, because again, I want to know what it is that is creating a tentative nature to this team to start the game where they're willing to be outworked. I would like to see one of two things if we're just talking about before we get into some player specifics here. I'd like to see a team that comes out and does one of two things: play free and loose like you did in the third period, let the goals fly as they're going to both ways. We know that's going to be a part of it. Or say we're dedicated to playing some gritty hockey here. Everybody is going to be getting back, playing on the boards, scrapping for every puck. It's not actually about shots. It's not about offensive production. It's just about showing that we'll dig our skates in against the team and say, hey, we can go that way. Remember, you and I talked about this last year a lot down the stretch and going to the playoffs. They need to show the ability and willingness to play another version of hockey when called upon. That's what I think I'd like to see over the next handful of games.
You have to remember too, the opposition, the coaching for Florida was very, very good tonight.
Yeah.
And the way I mean is they played essentially a neutral zone trap against the Devils from the jump. They played 1-3-1. They clogged the neutral zone. They did not let the Devils get through the neutral zone. These like sweet little, touch passes, these finesse passes that the Devils were trying to do in the first and second period were not working. And they kept trying to do it. And I think that's what my issue is. You and I always talk about,
Yeah.
don't just dump the puck and then try and chase and be slow. If you're going to dump the puck, I want to see the aggression to the puck, win those board battles. And the Devils just weren't doing it. Florida came out with a game plan and they executed perfectly. And the Devils were just so flat, and that's the issue. And going back to, more of the individual players that you were talking about too, we'll get into. For you, who stuck out to you besides Timo, obviously, who was benched? I think you and I both were kind of surprised with Marino. Lazar, like you said, he's a fourth line player. He was in 2 out of 3 games. It's going to happen where he's going to get rotated in and out of the lineup. But was there anybody that was on the ice that stuck out to you as a sore thumb in the first 2 periods that you're like, wow, we need to figure out what's going on with his game and who he's going to work well with line combination wise?
Yeah, I mean, I know you're going to discuss Luke Hughes here in a second, and we understand what he didn't show defensively in this game, and that's going to be a part of his process. So, I mean, I can go the other way with it here and just highlight that I thought it's kind of hard, man. You go to the third period, and I can say, oh, I like some of these moments from some players. Like I'll go on the positive side.
Yeah,
But
so
the problem is, it's like.
yeah.
Ignore the first 2 periods. Yeah, ignore the first 2 periods where some of these guys made mistakes. I'll highlight this because I think Luke is the talking point here, at least for you right now, and I think it's a fair one. I'll just highlight that you mentioned about Nico Hischier and his faceoffs. 115 tonight, only lost 5, a 75 win percentage. You're gonna love that. And
Yep.
you also saw Holla, who stepped in there, 1-6, lost 8, almost 43%. That's basically the quality, though. It's those 2 players. Jack Hughes struggled mightily in the face-off circle, just 2 wins on 12 opportunities. So there's things like that I'm looking at. I'm going to highlight that as being the positives from the offensive side. And I'll highlight too, as the positives for me, is that Jack Hughes, not that I need to compliment his motor, but essentially when it came to the third period and it was time to go, he was full out max every single shift, getting that puck on his stick, trying to do everything he could to get them sparked. And I know that that's a minor thing. I thought McLeod had a nice game. I thought there were guys that had nice games. It's just that we haven't seen them link them together. So with that out of the way, understanding a lot of guys struggled. Let's start with Luke Hughes.
Sure.
Your concerns on him defensively, understand, and this is more, we never want to get too microscopic on this, but essentially what happens is when guys play poorly, you start to look at not the young player. You'll look at the veteran guy. You'll look at the guy that has less expectations, a guy like Brendan Smith. So what did you see in that pairing between the two of them?
First of all, the Brandon Smith play with the puck bouncing, he wasn't in great position. That led to the second goal. Yes, it's a mistake by Brendan Smith, but I really do think that he played a pretty solid game defensively, which is why he got a lot of ice time in the third period, And when there's controversy with who should be the sixth defenseman going into the year, Brendan Smith is always going to be a talking point when the Ducks play poorly. It's always going to happen. I understand that.
And you brought Miller in too, so you brought in competition in theory.
And at the end of the day, if you want to bring Miller in for Smith for a couple games, cool. That's a sixth defenseman. That's what he is there for. That's what Colin Miller is there for, to come up and play. In regards to Luke Hughes, let me preface this by saying it's 3 games. The kid is phenomenal. He's an incredible talent. He's just, you saw him open his game up more in the third period, and I think focus more on his offensive side of the puck when they were down 4-0. When it's tighter games, when the Devils are pressing a little bit, I feel like he is so focused on his defensive game that he's struggling, that he's thinking too much. When he has the puck, when he's behind the net or when he's on the side of his net, when he's near the boards, he's turning the puck over a lot. He's blindly throwing passes up the boards. We see it all the time. He's going to make mistakes. It's part of being a rookie. It's part of growing. He stuck out to me in the first 2 periods with a lot of turnovers and being out of position. And, when I saw him with ball, and I told you this before we started recording, when I saw him with ball, I was like, wow, like it's completely different. I don't know if it was just because they were down and they were pressing and they just found their game in the third period, but he seemed more fluid. He was jumping in more offensively, quicker. He was quicker with his passes, quicker with his skating. So it's 3 games. The sample size is not big enough. I just saw the defensive breakdowns more for Luke Hughes, way more than I saw in the first 2 games. You saw more of those errors, but again, everybody was making the mistakes. I think it's unfair people are ripping apart Brendan Smith as much as they are, because yes, he is the sixth defenseman. Yes, he's a veteran. We're going to hold him more accountable because Luke is that rookie. The one mistake was horrible by Brendan Smith, but I don't think he had as bad of a game as people think.
Yeah, and I wonder too about watching it going forward. So there's 2 parts that you touched on there. The offensive side of things, I think that that's something that, again, in camp, in preseason, it looked like Luke was playing a lot freer and more aggressive going offensively. And I get it. There's a part of this that as we're going to watch, it's going to be about, well, what do we see as these players continue to play together, right? If they start to round themselves into form collectively, then it's all good. If it looks like there is some type of gap here, whether it is the pairings there, Luke playing better with ball because maybe there's a better security blanket there, that I think is sometimes what builds a perception around a sixth defenseman in Smith saying like, hey, well, when he plays with you, he looks worse. When he plays with somebody else, he looks better. That's not 1-to-1, but it can be a factor just from a chemistry standpoint. That's all well and good, but we'll come back to what we said in the offseason. Gosh, this team is going to be talented offensively, but there is going to be risk on the defensive pairings. That's a part of this. You have a lot of offensive-minded defensemen. You don't have a lot of anchoring players there. So early in this season, when you don't come out aggressive, when you don't really attack and open up the ice early in these games, you find yourself trailing. That's always going to be an uphill battle for the team the way they're modeled right now. Last thing before we get out the door here, Dan. When we talk about sample size, when I do this over on Locked On Nets with Doug, we always talk about, how many games. We look at the first 10 games just to see how could they play. But I always say, in the same amount of games in the NHL and NBA, I always say, give me 20 games. And I know that that's a quarter of the season, but I don't think that I can make any concrete decisions or perspectives around individual players or the team collectively before I get at least 15 to 20 games to really identify what true problems are. I feel like, I don't mean this negatively, that you might trend a little bit tighter on that timeline.
I'm a little tighter. I'm more the 10 to 13 game kind of period there. A dozen games, I'm going to say. Reason being is the East is going to be so tight. It's going to be such a competitive, not just the Metro, the Atlantic as well. The East is going to be absolutely stacked with great teams. And these points are extremely important early on in the season. It's really identifying yourself as a team and who you're going to be. we don't want to chase. We never want to chase a game. But when it comes to line combinations, I think we already know it's going to be a constant revolving door until we see more consistency with another line besides Jesper, Jack, and Toffoli. I think you're going to see a second line continue to shift and the third line continue to shift. You're going to have the fourth line be a staple of, when Nosek is healthy, obviously back in the lineup, McLeod and either Bastian or Lazar. That's going to be a staple. That's just going to be what it is, I think. And then you're going to see Hall paired off with, we don't know. I think the second and third line are going to be rotating lines until we see more consistency like we see with Jesper and like we see with Jack. And I believe that the talent is there, that you're going to have those top two lines. I think it's just a matter of finding it.
The interesting thing here for me would be, and by the way, I'm not talking about, you still want to be winning games, but just in terms of what this team is this season, right? You're going to make a lot of decisions. There's going to be a lot of changes. Just remember, the Jesper Bratt, Jack Hughes, Tyler Toffoli line was not what we all thought was going to be the top line going through, right? Like, I mean, that changed. So now I would behoove fans to wrap your head around the concept with the way Lindy Ruff is, even though that top line has been so dynamic and you don't want to mess with things that work. If that, as you said, the second and third lines continue to be kind of clunky, if you don't see guys really getting paired together and playing well, you're going to try to pluck one of your better players and say, hey, if we bring you down to that second line, we elevate somebody up, maybe that's how we create the balance. We still believe that offensively is a very deep team, and it's just a matter about getting those reps together, and it goes right back to the top where we said, this seems like, on paper, to have been a little bit of a mismanaged offseason, potentially, if you're trying to build chemistry across the second and third lines and the way you chose to go about it. We will see.
Oh, by the way, Luke Hughes, shoot the damn puck on the power play. You are.
Oh, you know what? Okay, yeah. Can we get? I want to make sure we touched on this because again, so I'm gonna.
Man, he has such an offensive ability, and I don't know if it's because Jack was there on his wing, and he's like, "Let me get this to Jack." He had an open shot at the point. I'm like, "What are you doing, dude? Shoot the puck."
I know, but this is exactly what everyone complained about with Jesper Bratt, and then he scored 2 goals in the very next game. Like, it's like, again, I know you're not saying it that way, but it's like I watch those sequences with Jesper and I watch them with Luke Hughes. Now, and from the TV, it's like when you see those combinations, there is a point when you're like, it's Jack to Luke, it's Luke to Jack, it's Jack to Luke, it's Luke to Jack, it's over to Dougie. Like, and you're like, hey, somebody here has to do it. But what I will say is, even though it became frantic in that third period, there's 22 block shots by the Florida Panthers. And I think this we talked about with Jesper Bratt too, right? It's like they're trying to create that alley, trying to get that avenue. And the one guy that you can keep pointing to as the sample is Dougie Hamilton. Every time you slide the puck across to him, he's like, rip. Is going on net because good things happen. So you want to see that here. And now what it becomes is, well, 2 games ago it was Jesper Bratt wouldn't shoot. Now Luke Hughes won't shoot. And the reality is what you want is like, I want everyone pulling the trigger, right? Let's get aggressive.
And I want to say this because we're talking about Luke Hughes. We're going to pick on many players, obviously, during the season. Luke Hughes is going to be fine. We knew what he was going to do this year. Defensively, I want him to be the most comfortable he can be. That's my biggest concern. And if that means changing up the pairings, if they saw something with Marino and they want to put Marino with, pair him off with someone else and maybe put Ball with Luke Hughes, which is what I thought was going to happen actually way earlier in the preseason. I thought that was going to be the line combination. Maybe do it, maybe that's going to make him feel more comfortable. I think the biggest thing for me is just utilize who he is, but make him feel most comfortable to play his game.
No, 3 games down, 79 to go. It's a long way. Like I said, I'm going to tell you, I need 20 games to know what this team is. Yes, after 20 games, you'll look at the standings and say the next 62 are going to be a grind for them to get to where they want to be. That's just a part of it. But I always want that first quarter of the season to flesh things out, see where there's concerns, see where there's surprising bright spots, see when they're going to call Nemec up and get him onto the pairings as well. We all know that it's in the works. Just having some fun, guys. We'll be back again before Friday. In the meantime, you get over to YouTube, Devils Puck Luck. You get over to Twitter, NJ Devils PL, at Danny the Face, at Adam Armbrecht, on TikTok, on Snapchat, on Facebook, on Instagram, all at
Devils Puck Luck.
You better believe it, guys. Enjoy the night. That is 1. They are 1 for 3 because the ultimate goal is winning every single game. We'll see if they get better on Friday night. Until next time, guys, be well.